I discovered that my husband had been unfaithful to me, and to make matters worse, my stepdaughter actively assisted him in keeping his secret hidden. Once I realized how deep their betrayal went, I decided to use the funds I had been saving for her higher education on myself, initiated divorce proceedings, and walked away from both of them entirely. Now, they are begging me to come back, pleading for a chance at reconciliation. Hello Reddit. I really need your advice right now, because I feel like I'm in over my head regarding what to do about my stepdaughter, if I should cut her off financially, emotionally, or try to salvage some sort of relationship. I'm truly at a loss. So here's the entire backstory, and why I believe I might have reached the point of no return. For background, I am a 42-year-old woman, and I have been in a relationship with my soon-to-be ex-husband, David, who is 44, for 15 years. Of those 15 years together, we've been married for 10, and for almost the entire duration of our relationship, I honestly believed that I loved him more than anyone else I had ever known. He also has a daughter, Stacy, who is 17, from a previous relationship. David was never married to Stacy's mother. They only dated casually for a few months, and in the midst of that, she became pregnant. By the time she found out about the pregnancy, they had already split up, but they both agreed to remain on civil terms so they could co-parent. Tragically, Stacy's mom passed away in a car crash when Stacy was merely 6 months old. Consequently, it was just David and Stacy against the world until I came along. When David and I started dating, he told me from the outset that he was seeking not only a life partner, but also someone who would be a mother figure for Stacy. I felt completely ready to take on that role, because I genuinely love children, and since Stacy was only 2 at the time, I believed we would naturally grow close as mother and daughter. I stepped wholeheartedly into their lives, wanting to raise Stacy as my own flesh and blood from day one. After 5 years of dating, he proposed, and we got married. While we definitely faced our share of challenges throughout our time together, I always ended the day confident that we were a strong family, and that David loved me just as fervently as I loved him. There was never a moment that hinted he might be doing anything behind my back. As recently as a few months ago, we were talking about how to celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary, maybe a grand vacation to someplace exotic, and he seemed excited beyond words, which only made me more convinced that our marriage was solid. People who cheat typically don't get enthusiastic about planning an anniversary adventure with their spouse and child, or so I mistakenly believed. Then, about 6 days ago, my entire world turned upside down when I discovered he had been sneaking around for the past 7 months with a co-worker. While I was at my own job, I received an unexpected email from this co-worker. It was filled with all the dirty details of their liaison, accompanied by undeniable evidence, text messages, phone logs, and even pictures of the two of them going out together on days David claimed he was on business trips. It made me shudder, realizing those so-called business trips were actually romantic getaways with his secret lover. That email stunned me to the core. I felt like I couldn't focus on anything else, so I left my workplace in a haze and went home, not entirely sure what my next step should be. When I arrived, the house was empty because Stacy was hanging out with a friend, and David was at work. So I sat down and reread the entire message thread and looked over every bit of proof that had been so brazenly thrust into my face. The co-worker had left her phone number, presumably for me to call if I had questions, or wanted confirmation that this was not some cruel, orchestrated prank. She confessed in her email that she felt I deserved the truth, since David clearly wasn't going to come clean. Apparently, my husband had been promising her he would come forward and end things with me so they could be together openly, but he kept stalling. She was tired of waiting for him to keep his word and fed up with sneaking around, so she decided to blow it all out in the open. From the screenshots she sent me, it was apparent he kept reassuring her he was ready to leave me and devote himself fully to her. She had initially believed he would be honest, but when 3 months passed and he still hadn't told me, she took matters into her own hands. I felt like I was living someone else's nightmare. After carefully reading every line in that email, I decided I had to call her, if only to verify that I wasn't losing my mind. The moment she answered, she apologized profusely, insisting she hadn't set out to destroy my marriage, but she'd fallen hard for David and couldn't live with the guilt any longer. She broke down the entire timeline, exactly when their affair began, how long they'd been sneaking around, and all the flowery promises David apparently made to her, the same promises he once made to me during our honeymoon phase. Every word sliced me to pieces, and by the time our phone call wrapped up, I genuinely thought my heart couldn't shatter any further. But then she told me the most soul-crushing part. Stacy was in on it. Not only had my stepdaughter known what was happening, but she had also been actively helping her father hide his treachery. At first, I couldn't even wrap my mind around it. This was the girl I'd raised from the tender age of 2, the girl I had loved as though she were my own flesh and blood. To find out she chose loyalty to her father's lies over honesty with me felt like a knife in the back. The co-worker explained that whenever David needed an excuse for ignoring my phone calls or disappearing overnight, Stacy would contrive stories to throw me off. And in exchange, David showered her with pricey gifts and treats. Suddenly, a dozen little oddities over the past months started to click into place. He'd been spoiling her far more lavishly than usual. I had naively assumed he was earning more at work and just wanted to be generous, but clearly it was all hush money. He had given me expensive jewelry and outfits, too, which I initially chalked up to his new habit of being extra attentive. Now it was obvious these gifts were part of a bigger plan to mask his immoral behavior. Finding out Stacy had not only been aware, but had also participated by hiding it and hanging out with his mistress from time to time was an even more debilitating blow than David's cheating. I felt like everything I believed about my family was a lie. After I hung up with that woman, I hastily packed a bag. The idea of waiting in that house for David and Stacy to return made me ill, imagining their excuses, or having to look them in the eyes. My tears felt endless. I couldn't stop sobbing, and I refused to let David witness just how devastated I was. So, I threw a few belongings into a suitcase, jumped in my car, and left town, checking into a modest hotel. I turned my phone off, because I couldn't bear to talk to anyone, not even friends or family. My night was spent drowning my sorrow with alcohol until I finally passed out. When morning arrived, I reluctantly powered my phone back on so I could call my office to take a sick day. There were dozens upon dozens of missed calls and text messages from both David and Stacy, each sounding more anxious than the last, but I was too hurt and furious to respond. While scrolling through my messages, I stumbled upon a text from a salesperson at a car dealership I'd been talking to a while back. I had originally been on the fence about buying a new car, mainly because it was quite expensive, and we had a big anniversary trip in the works. Plus, Stacy's 17th birthday was coming up, and I'd been planning on gifting her a new car, so I was trying to save up. But seeing that message stirred up a flash of anger inside me, anger at the thought of the birthday present I'd intended to give Stacy, who had stabbed me in the back. In that heated moment, I decided it was time to put my own desires first without worrying about anyone else's happiness. That dealership employee was checking if I was still interested in the car I'd previously shown interest in. On an impulsive whim, I marched down to the dealership myself and did something I never thought I would. I splurged on a gleaming luxury car, one that was far beyond what I had initially budgeted for. I should have felt guilty about the extravagant purchase, but the deep betrayal I felt overshadowed any second thoughts. And I had the funds, after all, because for the past decade, ever since marrying David, I had been scrupulously building a college fund for Stacy, planning to surprise her once she picked a university. I'd worked so hard for that money, imagining how thrilled she'd be someday. But that dream no longer existed for me. Since she hadn't hesitated to keep me in the dark about the affair, I no longer felt any passion for financing her future. So, I withdrew those savings and bought myself a high-end car as a form of raw catharsis. After that, I drove straight to our house. My intention was to confront them at last. As soon as I stepped through the door, they rushed toward me with frantic looks, claiming they'd been worried sick all night. I didn't let them get a single word in beyond that. I immediately announced that I knew the entire story from the co-worker's revelations. The looks of alarm on both their faces were priceless, and David, at least, had the courtesy not to try and lie or come up with excuses. Stacy started to babble through tears, insisting she was only trying to watch out for her father, that she felt torn and didn't know what to do, that she adored us both and was caught in a moral tug-of-war. I wasn't buying it. In my mind, 17 is plenty old enough to know right from wrong, and she had knowingly deceived me for months while accepting lavish gifts in return for her silence. So I told her exactly what I thought about her explanation. I believed it was all an act, and I wasn't going to fall for it. Hurt and anger flooded me, so I informed them on the spot that I intended to leave David. Given the magnitude of his betrayal, it shouldn't have been surprising news for him. I also stated that I was deeply disappointed in Stacey for her choice, probably even more disappointed in her than I was in David, because as a spouse, sure, he could cheat, but I had trusted Stacey more blindly than anybody in the world. She had been like my own child, and that sense of betrayal was searing. I admitted that losing the college fund was the direct result of her own actions. If she was going to lie to my face for months, she had no right to the sacrifices I'd made for her future. That was the hardest thing I'd ever had to say, but I was determined not to break down in front of them, so I walked out without allowing further discussion. I could hear them chasing after me, calling my name, but I just got in my shiny new car and sped away. I spent the next few days screening calls and ignoring messages from both of them. I contemplated blocking their numbers, but a part of me, whether due to nostalgia, disbelief, or heartbreak, just couldn't pull the trigger yet. I saw dozens of notifications piling up. Initially, David pleaded for forgiveness, but when that didn't get anywhere, his tone shifted to one of resigned regret, practically admitting what he'd done was unforgivable. Yet he implored me to reconsider my stance about Stacey, claiming she was a minor and shouldn't be punished just because he was a rotten spouse. Stacey, for her part, also blew up my phone, leaving apologetic messages, insisting that she'd made a massive error in judgment and had always seen me as her mother. She promised she'd never betray me again if I just gave her another chance. But I was too shattered to respond. The final straw came when David sent a text sounding frustrated that I wasn't answering. He demanded to know if I was done sulking and planned on returning to the family. That text enraged me, because he had no right to try and rush me after committing such a monstrous betrayal. So, I fired back that I had already spoken to a lawyer and filed for divorce. That was, in fact, a lie. At that moment I had only considered it, but I didn't want him to know how uncertain and unsteady I felt inside. David went silent for an hour before replying with a lengthy message, effectively calling me the antagonist of the situation. He said it was acceptable if I wanted to end our marriage, but he believed it was downright cruel and selfish to abandon Stacey, a teenage girl, and yank away the college fund she was counting on. He reminded me that I'd told him many times about setting aside that money for Stacey's education, so he never prioritized saving up for it himself. Now, with me revoking that fund, Stacey's opportunity to attend the out-of-state school she was eyeing was in jeopardy, because tuition there was way out of his price range, and applying for scholarships or loans would be complicated. Therefore, he labeled me the bad guy for effectively dangling that money in front of her all these years, only to revoke it over what he called one minor mistake. He also mentioned my fancy new car, implying I had flaunted my selfishness. I was dumbfounded by the nerve he had, but it still left me feeling awful, like maybe I was taking out my rage on Stacey when I should be focusing on David's wrongdoing. At the same time, I reminded myself that Stacey is nearly an adult and absolutely knew that helping her father hide an affair was wrong. I questioned myself, though, because I've never been a parent who uses finances or gifts to punish a kid. But I also couldn't help feeling like she had betrayed me in such a painful way that I couldn't just pretend everything was fine. So I asked Reddit if I was in the wrong for telling my stepdaughter I would no longer pay her college tuition after finding out she was complicit in her dad's infidelity. A couple of weeks later, I finally came back online to update everyone. My apologies for not giving an update sooner, but I was mired in a swirl of work responsibilities and consultations with my lawyer. First and foremost, I have been deeply touched by all the supportive messages and comments on my post. Knowing that so many strangers empathized with me and offered their kind words has been a beacon of hope during an incredibly dark time. After David's accusatory text and me reading all those divisive comments, I decided the healthiest path was to block him and officially file for divorce. Almost everyone seemed to agree that I needed to cut ties and remove him from my life to truly begin healing. So, that's precisely what I did. I made an appointment with an attorney and formally set the divorce wheels in motion. I also decided to remain steadfast in my decision not to pay for Stacey's higher education. Even if she had been my biological daughter, the idea that I was obligated to cover her college costs after such a betrayal wouldn't hold water for me. Actions have consequences, and she helped him cheat right under my nose, oblivious or uncaring about the heartbreak I'd eventually endure. David's claim that Stacy was suffering only because of his wrongdoing was inaccurate. She, too, had made her own poor choices. The last time I saw them, I explicitly said I was cutting off her college fund due to her complicit behavior, not just because David had been sneaking around. I feel I have the right to withhold money that I worked hard to save, particularly when the person who was supposed to benefit from it went out of her way to keep such a vile secret. If they are angry, that's on them. I don't see any reason to keep feeding into their entitlement. So I blocked both of them. Nonetheless, they have tried to reach me by calling from different phone numbers, texting from unknown lines, and emailing me using new or fake accounts. I read the messages out of curiosity, but I rarely respond. Their words are usually manipulative or guilt-inducing, but I'm done engaging with them. Fast forward to the next update. I received notice regarding the progress of our divorce, and David apparently doesn't plan to contest anything. I'm hoping it stays that way, so we can finalize everything peacefully. Even though it has only been 3 weeks since my life came crashing down, everything feels drastically changed. I lived in that hotel until the cost began piling up, and though I could have afforded a few more weeks of it, I decided it was wasteful. I have since moved in with a friend, who graciously offered me a spare room, and I'm incredibly thankful for that. I'm also looking into starting therapy, primarily because my friend, who is a licensed mental health professional, says it could really help me navigate the emotional aftermath of betrayal. I've never been to therapy before, but I'm giving it serious thought. The biggest life change I've made is quitting my job. This decision wasn't made lightly. I've been employed continuously for over 2 decades, starting as soon as I left college. But I believe I deserve a break to sort myself out. I've put money away for years, and ironically, because I no longer plan on supporting Stacy's future, I have more resources to fall back on. My new dream is to utilize the time to pivot toward building a small business, something I've always envisioned doing someday. My plan was originally to wait until Stacy headed off to college, so I wouldn't have to stress over finances, but now the slate is blank for me. I'm thinking of spending the next few months recovering, brainstorming, and connecting with potential partners or investors. I'm honestly excited about the possibilities, even though I'm still deeply wounded by everything that happened. I also finally told my parents about the divorce, which took a lot of courage. I ended up making a broad announcement on social media, simply stating that I would be ending my marriage, without diving into the personal reasons. My closest circle already knows the details, so that's all that matters. Now that the legal proceedings are in motion, I'm hoping to wrap things up and move on with my life. Fast forward again, and here's another development. David and I have an upcoming meeting with a mediator. It's nerve-wracking, because it will be the first time we've actually been face-to-face since I cut him off. Just thinking about it makes my stomach churn. I don't know if I'll feel heartbreak, rage, or a messy combination of both when I see him. To make my anxiety skyrocket, about half an hour ago, I got an email from Stacy. I had assumed she'd finally given up, considering it had been nearly 3 weeks since she last tried to contact me, but lo and behold, here she was again. I braced myself to read yet another plea about money for college or requests for a second chance, but it turned out to be different. She wrote what seemed like a sincere apology, saying she felt horrible about everything she had done, that she was consumed with guilt for betraying me, and she genuinely loved me as a mother figure. She told me she realized she had hurt me even deeper than David had, which made her feel awful. She promised that she truly did care for me all those years. She was just consumed by fear and confusion. She also insisted that David manipulated her emotionally, lavishing her with gifts and persuading her to keep quiet. Although his affair partner had tried to paint it as Stacy's choice, she argued she was under immense pressure, torn between telling me the truth and protecting her father. She never explicitly demanded access to the college fund in this email, she merely expressed regret. I want to trust her. I do miss her, more than she might ever know. But I'm torn because the heartbreak is still excruciating, and it's hard to suddenly believe that she's being entirely authentic now, after so many months of deliberate secrecy. Yet, that email weighed heavily on me. I've been trying to keep my no-contact rule, but it's not as easy as I hoped. I know I can't just snap my fingers and forget 15 years of raising her. I also still miss David sometimes, though I realize the idea of going back to him is impossible. For my own sanity, I have to stand firm in my boundaries, even if they ache. Finally, a couple more months passed, and the last update is that our divorce is set to be finalized soon. I feel a bizarre sense of relief, like I'm at the end of a very dark tunnel, even though there's still residual pain. The mediation went relatively smoothly, with David opting not to contest. Seeing him each time made me feel a tangled mash of anger and sadness, but I endured it. Now I'm settling into my new apartment, a comfortable space I found a couple of weeks back. My friends and relatives visit often, ensuring I'm not too lonely, which warms my heart. I'm aware that as time goes on, the visits will taper off, and I'll be left to navigate life alone, but I'm making my peace with that. Therapy has started, and I anticipate a lengthy journey of healing, but I feel optimistic that I'll emerge stronger and more resilient than before. I haven't spoken a single word to David outside of official divorce business, although I still get random emails and texts from Stacy. At first, it crushed me to see her messages, but I decided to respond to one email last week. I told her, plainly and simply, that I missed her, too, but that my decision to revoke her college fund still stood. She replied promptly, admitting she accepted that she no longer deserved that money, and she plans to attend an in-state college to lessen the cost. She also mentioned that David refused to be the co-signer on any student loan, so she's resigned to working part-time to help pay for her tuition. Despite it all, she's come to terms with that sacrifice. Since then, we've exchanged a few more emails, chatting about ordinary things and life updates. She says she wants to rebuild some kind of bond with me, if I'm open to it. I told her that I would need a lot of time. My heart is still raw, but a part of me is relieved to learn she's taking genuine responsibility for her actions. So, that's where we stand. I'm on the brink of becoming officially divorced. I've relocated, started therapy, and blocked David. I've allowed a tiny line of communication with Stacy, though I'm cautious and emotionally guarded. I'm crossing my fingers that life will continue moving forward in a positive, freeing direction. Even if it takes a while, I'm determined to heal, rediscover my footing, and see what life has in store for me next.